Welcome back to Between the Levees. Today is the first family affair I have had on the show here. We have Chaps and Kempton Baldridge Jr. They have quite a history in the maritime industry, and I want to know a little bit more about it. Uh, Chaps and Kempton, thank you all for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Before we get started, Chaps, you were mentioning to me that Turbo Hughes actually reads. Um, he
Yes.
he was the connection to make this introduction with you. Tell me about how you met him.
I actually, I mean, you hear Turbo before you actually see him in many instances. It's a primal sound, so unmistakable. I was at the time hopping from one vessel to another, and uh, I think it was back in 2010, maybe 2011, and Turbo had an opinion. I know that you find shocking, but he wanted to register his opinion that he said, you know what you really should do, and you're going to tell me, and he said, if you should get those books out there and have a little variety and maybe encourage these young deckhands to read something that doesn't have a centerfold in it. And and I said that's really great. In fact, I was going there, and then he let me know the kinds of books that he enjoyed, and it was easy enough to set those aside. I mean, in other words, his interests were naval history, maritime history, American history, and he for some reason the Harlequin romances didn't seem to interest him much, and we became friends, and we've remained friends, and when things go south, when things go bad on the river, and you and I both know that they can be pretty stark, and so I take Turbo's calls whenever they come in, and I've told him that he can call me at 4 a.m. to tell me that everything is just great. It hasn't happened yet, but I'm still waiting. So.
Well, I hope one day maybe about 6:30 he calls you with a hey, all is well.
Right.
But nonetheless, fill me in a bit on your childhood, where you grew up, what led you to ministry, and how you were first introduced to the maritime industry.
I think in the womb, my father was he was a mariner, if not by disposition, certainly by circumstances. And so, in other words, he was one of 5 children growing up in the Depression. And being on a boat was the way that he could have a degree of independence. And he, even as a teen, I think he saw himself seeing the world and not just adventure, but making a living at sea. And when the President Roosevelt announced that there was going to be a federal Merchant Marine Academy, my father happened to have been. It was the same time he was graduated, class of 41 from Lower Merion High School in Philadelphia, and he wanted to get in so badly that he actually signed on after he was graduated from high school. He was actually working on an ice wagon, which is something that we don't even have. But in other words, a horse-drawn ice wagon bringing block ice out, and he was studying to take the exams, and then he went to a prep school in Annapolis, Maryland, to prep to go to take the academy exams, and it must have worked because December 6th, 1941. Dad and the first class at Kings Point, the United States Merchant Marine Academy, reported into Fort Schuyler, which was then and now the New York Maritime Academy, the oldest and the first maritime academy in the country, and they were formed there at Fort Schuyler in the fortress bitter cold day, and for the next what was it, until January 18th, from December 6th, 41 until January 18th, they were there at Fort Schuyler. And on the 18th, they were awakened, and he and his classmates were put into longboats because the Throgs Neck Bridge wasn't built yet, and taken across Long Island Sound over to the Walter P. Chrysler estate. And they formed up the very first class of 43 at the United States Merchant Marine Academy. And within January 18th, so 2.5 months later, my father and all of his classmates shipped out. So as soon as March was over, they began to be farmed out to different ships, convoys. My father went to the SS Santa Rosa, which later became the US AT Santa Rosa. It was the flagship of the Grace Prudential lines. And Dad, this was the worst part of this is 1942. This was the worst year in terms of shipping losses, and it was a formative experience for my dad. He lost significantly, 142 of the cadets, the cadet midshipmen at Kings Point were to die either by U-boats and mines and other mishaps at sea. And when my father died at the age of 96, 3 years ago, among the last conversations we had were his memories of those who didn't make it, and remarking how odd and unfair maybe that life was, that he should get to live a long life, and so many of his classmates didn't. So that was my dad, Dick Baldridge. And so by the time I showed up in 1955, everything that my father did, I wanted to know what he was about and what he did. And my older brother and sister, they had their own things, but I was drawn, and I would pester him until he would tell me how he could look into a dark, into the horizon there on Long Island Sound, and just by he could discern from the lights what was passing by, the range lights and running lights and all of that, and it was wizardry as far as I was concerned. And I was hooked. This is what I didn't want to be my father necessarily, but I did want to measure up in his eyes. And that was the modicum. Oddly enough, Kings Point, I saw what the academic requirements were for Kings Point, and I knew, ooh, that. But weirdly, I applied to the Naval Academy, and the Naval Academy had seen my grades and told me that, go back and study harder. But in the meantime, the Citadel, they saw my SATs, and they were happy to admit me. And so that was my path to get where I thought I wanted to go. And after I was at the Citadel, I enlisted in the Coast Guard Reserve, and that worked out very, very well for me. And there we go. So that, my time at sea began informally as a teen, but I began to pull in a paycheck from my time at sea when I was 18 or 19.
And what led you into ministry and eventually into the barge industry?
Well, there's a saying that some of us entered the ministry because it was the last means by which God had to save us. And there's a certain amount of truth to that. I had a classmate who said to me that I was the last person he ever would have suspected. And I said, no, you're not wrong. Yeah. I don't know that I had any inclinations to the ministry, but what I did have was a memory of how much I needed. I didn't see any chaplains when I was in the Coast Guard, when I went out to sea. As a matter of fact, through when I was at Cape May, the Coast Guard boot camp, I remember that saying, "Oh, go see the chaplain about it," was really sort of a toss-off. That it was a dismissive, like a crying towel, and it was evidently thought to be a sign of weakness, and there frankly weren't a lot of chaplains, so I had nothing on which to model myself. But I also knew that if there was a mistake to be made, I was going to make it. And so later on, when I matured somewhat, or at least I thought about maturing, the idea of becoming a chaplain became appealing to me. And if there was a way that I could help someone through confusion, through upset, through isolation, through that, I wanted to be able to do that. And so that's when I entered the ministry. I was in my early 30s, and it wasn't easy. And the process of discernment wasn't made easy on me. A bit like an Annapolis telling me that we've seen your grades, here's your file. We won't be needing it. The first time I sought to enter the ministry, the reception was not enthusiastic. Even my own mother didn't think I was cut out for that. I don't know what she thought I was going to be better at. But over time, it resonated, and the whole idea of helping someone through not only difficulties, but the being with people in the midst of what life is throwing at you. And I was a Navy chaplain on active duty for a few years, and then I had actually reserve assignments that were with the Marine Corps, for example, that were even though they were technically reserved, they were often life and death situations, and very often dramatic mid-air collisions and fatalities, and it was extremely rewarding. I retired from the Navy when I thought I had topped out in 98, and soon thereafter, our family moved overseas to Belgium, and that's where Kempton and his sister were raised from 1999 through 2010. And while there, September 11th happened, and I couldn't help but see how important it was to have someone who could be there with you during a time of confusion and anguish and grief and all of that. And so even though I was there as the rector of an Episcopal church, but largely an international church in Waterloo, Belgium, I spent a fair amount of time working with the Americans at the NATO headquarters, and that was indeed very satisfying. And there was an opportunity that arose that I never foresaw that came up in 2010. And even my own bishop at the time said, "Ooh, that's a long shot." I wish you well, but boy, that's the competition for that is pretty stiff. And I knew it was a long shot. I'm applying from Belgium for a position in Paducah. And I didn't know where Paducah was. And in fact, one of our friends in Belgium assumed that we were talking about the Paducah, which is a suburb of Colombo, Sri Lanka, different Paducah. So, but Seamen's Church flew us into the into town, and we resonated very much with Paducah and the community, and I certainly knew about Seamen's Church Institute. That it is a storied an epic organization. I didn't imagine that I was worthy, but paraphrasing Eleanor Roosevelt, I certainly wanted to give it my all to try to be. And so for the next 12, 13 years, when they offered me the position, I'd gone from a dream job to a dream job. And I remember once the HR director for Seamen's Church asked me what I did for fun. And I said, I go to work. Maybe that's why Turbo and I became friends, because I think he recognized that I loved what I did on the river and aboard ship and aboard vessels, every bit as much as he did, and passion responds to passion. So that's a nutshell right there.
Before we touch on your experience with Seamen's Church, of course, you mentioned Kempton and his sister, I think you said,
Yep,
were born and moved around a bit. Kempton, you've been sitting there ever so quietly and patiently. Fill me in on your upbringing overseas and what led you to your career path now.
I mean, you've heard my father's story, so I mean, and you've heard all that very deep-seated passion and interest, and and his complete adoration and his adoration for his father, my grandfather. And I think my father took that and passed it on. I spent my childhood building a lot of ships and planes, and that was our father-son time, launching model rockets and stuff. And so really not, I mean, yes, being a Navy chaplain, there certainly was the influence, but I think the bigger picture was certainly just things that move and fly and float, and not so much drive, admittedly, not so much NASCAR, but rockets, airplanes and boats. And so going through my childhood, I certainly was, it would be Navy one day, and then there was Coast Guard the next, and then I think I guess it was a matter of time before, much like my grandfather, come full circle back to the arriving on the Merchant Marine. So I mean, I'm certainly being raised overseas, seeing the sort of, there's a certain, I went to an international school for all of middle and high school, so that global component that is inherent in just transportation in general. I had that too. Over there was never over there. It was right in front of me. We had, things like International Day, and I remember in December we would have things. We had a Santa Lucia celebration where all the classmates of Scandinavian origin would go through the halls singing, Santa Lucia. So it was the international component of maritime transportation was always very real to me. So there's that. That said, I did my undergraduate at Johns Hopkins, where I studied history, but every single class that had a term paper or a some sort of final project, I would find a way of relating that to either the military or the maritime field. So I remember writing about, I took a class called Archaeology of Food, and I just wrote about what were the Roman soldiers eating and sailors eating. So, not a stretch, just sort of almost very hyper specific. I did my sophomore thesis paper about the transformation of the Navy from the fall of Saigon to the bombing of Libya. So between the Ford administration to Reagan's second term. And then I did my senior thesis about Guadalcanal. So yeah, I guess certainly a little more of the military heavy bent, but and perhaps maybe seeing my dad, my dad's little epiphany about the larger maritime, the Western rivers. So it was thought provoking, I think, for myself. So after I worked for a not-for-profit overseas in the Marshall Islands, where I taught English, math, and science. In sort of figuring out what my next move would be, while living with my parents in Paducah, I applied and attended Great Lakes Maritime Academy, where I got my third mate's license and initially started sailing out of the Union Hall on Great Lakes freighters, which is, with the exception of Gordon Lightfoot, which I guess made a national, the Edmund Fitzgerald, is also a thing that growing up overseas and I hadn't really thought about. But every corner of the world has there's a regional maritime culture to it that sometimes it gets exported, sometimes it doesn't. And to be part of the Great Lakes environment was great. I sailed as second mate on the SS Badger for 3 seasons. One of the last coal-fired vessels in the U.S. fleet. And now I'm learning about the ins and outs of offshore of the Gulf of the offshore world and the Gulf of Mexico, and basically being an equipment vessel for tankers doing lightering. So that's sort of the long and short of my own history with the maritime field.
Well, I admittedly know very little to nothing, probably more like nothing, about the Great Lakes. I've been right outside New Orleans, near Baton Rouge, my entire life. Tell me what it was you were doing on the Badger.
So it's funny. So I was taking classes down at the Star Center, the AMO's primary training facility, and I met one of the mates who was working on the Badger, and he said, "Hey, we're actually in the market for a third mate." And I thought, okay, great. So I applied, and as I learned halfway through that first season, a friend of mine, Aaron Personaire, he was on his way out because he got a job up in Isle Royale, which is in Lake Superior, and really has a whole other conversation. Really cool history to that place. So I sailed for a couple months as third mate, and then when Aaron left, I got sort of thrust into the role as second mate. My primary job was navigating at least halfway across the lake, thereabouts, and then unloading cars. The first mate would load the cars and trucks and passengers in Ludington, Michigan, and he'd take first half or so, do the crossing, and then just shy of Manitowoc, Wisconsin, I would take over, and then subsequently pass it on to the captain as we docked, and then I would supervise unloading the vessel, and then as soon as everyone's clear, and if customer service was ready, which usually they were, for turnaround, then we'd just do it all over again for loading cars and trucks and oversized vehicles and passengers for the trip back from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, back to Ludington. So it was something that admittedly did not come naturally. Like there's no, in theory, there's no right or wrong way to load the Badger. I should probably fully admit that I think I calculated my success rate of leaving on time, and it was about 70%. Not that great. It's a historic. It's a converted railroad car ferry that's now doing cars and trucks. So it is sort of the scenic route of crossing Lake Michigan. But yeah, it was very interesting because they added an upper deck to it as well for driving. We would have car runners drive. We would have assigned drivers, mostly kids, honestly, middle, or not middle school. Geez, no, high school and early 20s for the most part, and they would drive it, just run back and forth driving the cars, and we have AVs and deckhands directing them of where to go and where to fill up what section of the cargo deck to park the cars. So it's pretty incredible the conversion that's made. This is after all a vessel that was built in 1952, and for the Chesapeake and Ohio for Chessie systems. And in fact, there were still the rails on the car deck from that era. And for it to now be converting, or for it to be now carrying cars and trucks and windmill components, oversized vehicles, where we're all, and those would often be the last ones on and the first ones off because they would just be there at the end. It's pretty remarkable. It speaks to maybe an understated American tradition, certainly a maritime tradition of being able to convert vessels. Vessels that are built for one thing. Yeah, if you with the right naval architects, with the right design, can do a lot of other things. You think about the escort carriers in World War II, the light carriers in World War II that were. These are carriers built on light cruiser hulls or tanker hulls. So, in fact, on the Great Lakes as well, there's a converted Lea Tregurtha is a converted tanker that's now carrying iron ore. So, imagination, thinking creatively, all that fun stuff that we're raised with on PBS. It can go far in the maritime field.
Now, was this ferry service primarily passenger or industrial or to tourism?
All of the above, honestly. You have a lot of folks who would do it. It's on a lot of lists for things you must do in the state of Michigan or Wisconsin, and that's absolutely true. So it's a National Historic Landmark. It is technically an extension of U.S. Route 10.
Right.
So that's pretty wild. But yeah, we do. So we'll have, and it's scenic. I know for a fact that there are some relationships that have been formed where the girl is living in Wisconsin and the guy's living in Michigan. So still waiting for John Cougar Mellencamp to write the song about that romance. But and like I said, we would still carry windmill parts. The Amish would bring some of their sheep on board. We would have some of our ABs who were forklift trained would be carrying apples from one state to the other, or cherries. I remember crates of cherries going over once. So let's see, livestock as well. I know this past summer, because I still keep in touch with folks there, that they did the Budweiser Clydesdale. So, what's more American than that? And yeah, so the tourism, there's a tourism component, there's a practical component. I know that the They do operate seasonally, so it is something that operates from more or less from April to October. So outside those months, semi trucks need to find another route, and they do. But still, 6 months out of the year ain't bad for avoiding Chicago, which is effectively what the incentive to take the Badger. So yeah, it's really all of the above. When they do doubles, which because of the pandemic, in my second and third season we didn't do doubles, but my first season we did, and primarily the midnight crossing, or the evening and midnight crossing, either from Ludington or from Manitowoc, would be a little more commercial heavy. But that said, you would still have passengers who just wanted to enjoy the night. I mean, the star. You got people just ride it for stargazing because it's pretty clear there up in in the middle of Lake Michigan. So,
What were the biggest challenges you faced at the helm of such a vessel? And are there any interesting or funny stories about things you've seen out there on that lake?
well, I think the biggest thing is it's twin screw and single rudder. So when we flip around in the harbors of either Ludington or Manitowoc, the twisting that has to and no bow thruster. So the twisting that has to occur is truly remarkable. And I was fortunate to sail with a captain who it was like the back of his hand. There was one time with heavy winds that it was just damn near impossible. And we were probably we managed to maintain our position there off close to the dock for an hour and a half, trying not to drift into the mud and successfully doing so. But it was something. It was very wearing on the captain's patience and on I was like, do you need help? He's like, no. I remember at one point in that hour and a half, he just stepped back and he was like, okay, here we go. You just sort of try again. So once again, that's something that from the a relic of the 1950s. Not to mention the engineering side of it, which I can't really speak to, but there were times that this is a vessel that had water tenders and firemen. So there were times that I would be up in the pilot house, and I would get a call, someone screaming from the engine room saying like, "Yeah, we're going to need to reduce RPM. I'll figure it out." I was like, "Okay." So I just hang up the sound-powered phone and we'd slow down for a bit. And if we'd have to let passengers know, hey, sorry about it. We're doing what, and you always run into passengers. I never understood. We would have some passengers who are clearly on their way to a business meeting. Like, so you took a coal-powered, you took something that's from the middle of the 20th century. We're like nearly a quarter of the way in the 21st. Why did you think this would work? Come here for the sights. Come here for the history. Don't come here for because you're a very important business person. I don't know, and that's just my opinion. But and in terms of funny stories, I mean, boy, besides your standard fare, because we would serve alcohol on board, so of course you have some passengers, ma'am, this is not a top, please put a top on, please, no top and stuff. There was one man, he looked so much like Robin Williams, and I'm not going to go into conspiratorial thing, but the wheelsman and I just spent the 4 hours crossing, just because and also he was staring right at us in front, because you can see the front, the sort of the bow where everyone's just sort of sitting out on lawn chairs, and this guy was just staring right at us for a good 4 hours, and he looked like Robin Williams, and I don't know, is that also maybe a reflection of when you're steering effectively a single course for 4 hours, yeah, you're looking, if nothing's on the scope and nothing's on the horizon, you look for Robin Williams. I don't know. So things like that. It goes without saying, and I don't know what's the right or wrong way, and that's I know that COVID era stuff can get political, but like, of course there were we did our best to sort of maintain COVID protocols, but when passengers didn't, and our you don't really know how to react there, so we would run into some issues. Nothing crazy, but just mask wearing and photographers and look at this person. What do you want us to do? Tell the sir, put on a mask. You want me to hold him down for you? I mean, of course we ran into those sort of things. The pet policy was always interesting, where what is it, the ADA regulations and folks and the status of an emotional support animal. The highs and lows of passenger vessel work is, we could everyone in the American fleet, because it's not, there are not a whole lot of American flag passenger vessels, but the ones that do exist, yeah, we probably all could sit around with with a few beers and really relate to each other, because it's a lot. It's it amounts to floating hotels. It's interesting. So
If I've found out anything in my time in the barge industry, it's that boats and barges are a whole lot easier to talk to than people. So I can only imagine dealing with a boat full of passengers. But is this current role offshore in the Gulf? Was it your next position?
I briefly took a break to work in a shoreside position, and then realized that I just because I had recently gotten engaged, and I thought, oh well, now it's time to hang up the hat, and realized that it wasn't really quite a good fit. So I returned to sailing shortly thereafter, and so I've been with AT now for over a year. Yeah, you learn a lot.
The shore side of things, the relationship between vessels and shoreside personnel is it's interesting. All my thoughts on that are probably a little half-baked, but the relationship between the two, because ultimately shoreside personnel are the sort of the go-betweens, ultimately between shareholders and stuff, who really don't know about the trials that mariners face. Could it be better? Should it be better? Yes. I don't have a solution to that. But I realized in my 7 months working shoreside, just how deep and how much of a conversation needs to occur and in fairness, that you see some editorials and articles online from shipping across from global shipping. So I know that conversation's happening, but there's still work to be done. But yes, so after my little year off of sailing, I returned, and now I've been with AET for a little over a year. So.
Well, it sounds like this role is a little bit different than what you do on the Great Lakes. What does a day in the life out there on watch look like?
So the best part, I'll say, working on an offshore supply vessel, because we're just, we're we're around 500 tons or so. So it's only 7. We only have a crew of 7. So I like to say there's no room for egos. We've got a captain, 2 mates, 2 ABs, a chief, and an oiler, and that's it. So we haul fenders and hoses and wire tails, as well as we can hold up. We have 2 mooring masters and 2 mooring master assistants, is we just carry equipment so that and then go up alongside tankers, deploy the mooring master and the assistant, you know, one to each to the ship to be lightered and the service ship. Deploy the equipment, and then the mooring master and the mooring master assistant will do their thing. We'll cruise and escort, make sure that no fishing vessels get in the way, and they just they make their fuel transfer, and that's pretty much lightering support in a nutshell. It's what's nice about it is that the traditional, you know, 4 on 8 off in terms of watches. If we'll do that from time to time if we're transferring, if we're going from the Galveston lightering area to Corpus Christi lightering area, but otherwise it's a lot more of a sort of a teamwork and sort of a tag team environment between the two mates and the captain of just, okay, I'll do this if you want to get some sleep later and stuff. So the balance is a lot more pragmatic, which is there's some there's some interest. There's some value in that. It does make a sort of friend. It's less rigid. It's more. It's not. I mean, yeah. I guess I see how that can be both ways. So, you know, nothing being official, but you know, if you're with the right crew, which, you know, so far I've been with some great crew members. You just sort of we're there to get the job done. And the rotation of 28 on, 28 off is a nice balance. The food budget's great. We have a huge walk-in freezer and walk-in fridge. No official cook, so hopefully one of the ABs or mates or chief engineers is a good cook, and I've lucked out again in that respect. But it's just sort of the whole environment is just feels very straightforward and balanced in the best way. So that's, you know, it's interesting. It's, you know, small vessels like that in the Gulf, especially this time of year. Yeah, it gets a little stormy, and yeah, the hull is shaped like a watermelon. So, you know, make sure everything is secure. But you know, but it's yeah, it's just straightforward and fair. Which, you know, what more could you ask for, right?
Absolutely. And I've heard a lot recently that how important the food is out there on these vessels, and how good food will sure make a trip a lot easier. But anyway, switching back, Chaps, you mentioned when Kempton sat down that there is an abundance of history behind his head.
Yes.
I don't know if you, Kempton, if you have to, can you pick the laptop up and show us around? But if y'all don't mind, walk me through that history.
Good choice.
Okay, so there's Dad with his sailor suit at an appropriate age, and I don't know. There's the poster child for a Cracker Jack box, because Dad was way too old to be dressing in his sailor suit. But hey, he liked it. You know, good for him.
I was a sea cadet.
Okay. I'm sure you got, you still look like you were on the cover of Cracker Jacks, on a box of Cracker Jacks. So this is probably, let's see here. Okay. There is the man second. Let me see what I'm doing there. Okay, so the man second from the, I don't know what it's inverted. The guy with his here, this gentleman here. Hold on. That is, am I pointing right, Dad?
Yep.
Yeah, that's Moby. That's that's Dixon Baldridge. And you can see Merchant Marine Academy, even in the 40s. That's, I don't know what vessel they're on, Dad, but
It's the gosh, it was a training vessel for the Kings Point.
Okay. Yeah, having a good old time. And then we've got the married pictures. So there's Dad and my mom on the deck of the Intrepid during Dad's commissioning into the Navy in 1984. And then this is let me maybe pan back. Sorry about the reflection. That's Dixon and Edie Baldridge, my dad's parents. And then the sort of other on my mom's side, well, that reflection is not great, but is what it is. That's Charles P. Curtis and Semler Curtis. He also served in World War II in the Navy aboard the USS Ranger, the Santa Fe, and the USS California, and was a survivor of the kamikaze attack that the California endured off Lingayen Gulf in January 45. So there's that element as well. I mean, Navy wasn't his whole life. It was just, he just did his part in the war like many others. He later became a pediatrician, my dad's pediatrician. So my dad knew his father-in-law before he met his wife, which speaks to that Norman Rockwell America, I guess, of Fairfield, Connecticut. So yeah, that's sort of another element of the maritime field in our family that I know Dad talks about.
But they sailed on the SS Hope, for example.
Yes, he did that. But that was more as a pediatrician. He was a gunnery officer on the Ranger and Santa Fe and the California. So yeah, things that float have a very strong heritage in this household.
Well, Chaps, anything behind his head? Any other interesting points of history that you'd like to share with the audience here?
Well, there's another photograph that might be familiar to your viewers. It was actually repeated in the newspaper. It's my return from the Gulf War. And it's on the pier in Norfolk. I rode back on the guided missile cruiser, the USS Thomas S. Gates, and I had left shortly after our daughter Grace was born, and when you're being reunited with family after dramatic times. That's something, again, that's really fairly universal, whether you're gone for 28 days or 28 months. Being reunited with family. Kemp and I were joking around about this before the interview. The two best days in a mariner's life are the day you leave and the day you come back often. When Isabel and I were first married, Isabel indulged me and made one of my dreams or my fantasies come true when she met my ship. I was at the time I was working on getting qualified as an officer of the deck on board the USS Clifton Sprague, and Isabel made the trip up to Providence, Rhode Island, and was there on the pier, and when we pulled in, and it just it was just I had to pinch myself because it just was it was so sublime. And you could be a towboat or a tugboat deckhand, a Maine fisherman, doesn't matter. Having that special person there waiting on the pier, and I have to say, the absence of that, I will never forget how the cook I was riding on board the Sylvia H, which was a United barge company, which later became an Ingram towboat. And the cook took me aside and said, the mate, she said, I'm kind of worried about the mate. He thinks nobody knows, but we all know. His wife has left him. And when we pass by his hometown on the river, his little girls, his wife and his two little girls won't be there. And it's going to be brutal for him. And I was so glad she told me that, so I could be prepared to be a support to him. Because that's the thing. You might love what you do out there, and you might be well compensated and all of that, but without those special people to come home to, or if there's been an interruption in that, there is a disruption in the force, as they say in Star Wars, and it hurts. And I have to say that when I encounter mariners who become destitute, homeless, etc., often it's a result not of things going bad on the river so much as there are things on the home front, and it is heartbreaking. So that was again part of my remit. One reason why I loved being able to ride on the towboat. In other words, yes, we responded to crises, but and Turbo and so many others would echo this, that the great value often was being able to ride and stay overnight and to be there at breakfast, or to be up there in the deck locker for the gams. Got a minute, and to unpack those either questions or those concerns. And I have to say, I miss it now that I'm retired. I miss it. I do keep busy, and certainly Kempton, hearing Kempton stories, helps to keep me current. We haven't even mentioned that, but in Kempton in his time has encountered life and death situations, and those are, that happens. We sometimes people pass from natural causes, other time as a result of accidents, but these are more people with whom you work on a vessel, as you know. They're not co-workers. In fact, in some ways, I think it's almost insulting. And so when you've lost a shipmate, somebody that you just had breakfast with, or that you were watching a movie with the night before, or maybe somebody you argued with the day before, to have them not be there anymore, particularly in a permanent way. It's hard to explain to people ashore, but I think it hits harder with those of us who've been out there.
Well, does anything come to mind specifically, interesting stories? And I know I keep asking that to everyone. It's kind of a broken record on my end, but of your time in the military service with the Navy and the Coast Guard, any highlights or lowlights of your time out there?
Well, the going over the side, that was remarkable. And you're going to say, when was that? And I'll say which time. I'm a slow learner. First time I was 19 years old, and I was so focused. I was on a 41-foot utility boat, and we were I was supposed to rig up a hawser because we were going to be towing a vessel that had broken down and was in danger of being washed ashore, because we were dealing with the outer bands of a hurricane that was coming up the coast, and we wanted to tow them to safety. And I was so focused on okay, the little bunny coming up, for the not the clovage, but the bowline. Okay, it goes like this, and that I wasn't paying attention to the fact that we were about to get broached as we were maneuvering, and we got pooped, which is not something that happens on the river much, maybe down in New Orleans, but so we had a wave, a comber come and just sweep the deck, and so with me included. And I did have my PFD on, but I wasn't strapped in. And I remember just how surprised I was. I didn't expect this. I mean, I guess intellectually I knew it could happen, and I'm like a cartoon, Daffy Duck or whatever. I'm just grabbing on anything, and as the water is washing over the fantail, I did manage to grab the rail that was right there at the gunnel, but I realized this is not a strong position I'm in here, and I certainly wasn't convinced that anybody had seen me. But the next thing I knew, I think he must have been Turbo's little brother, because Chief Gannis, who I felt this huge hand come grab me by I guess by my life jacket, and lift me with one hand and throw me on deck, and he said, "Baldridge, get in here and quit fooling around. We don't have time for this." and I, like a wet, like a mackerel that there on deck, and of course I'm soaking wet, and he didn't care about that. He didn't want to have to account for the losing a deckhand, and I guess I hadn't gotten on his bad side, so that he decided that I was worth hauling back in. And I say that was the first time that I went over the side. Another time I went over the side was in Brandenburg, Germany, where Kempton was on his honeymoon recently, and I didn't want to wake anybody up, but if you lose your line in the queue of a lock, because they only run they only have daylight locking there, and so between 8 a.m.
You were impatient.
and sunset, I was impatient. And
you're not supposed to do a lock just one person. That's literally
yes. So, thank you. Yes, thank you for the reminder. So I needed somebody to get I ran up, got the bow line, and I needed somebody on the stern line, and there
was no one. You were trying
right.
Ship,
right.
And so you fell in the lock. You broke a rib.
Well, no, 3 ribs. But the next thing I knew, I had the stern line, but that's all I had was the stern line, and
That's unsafe. That's patently unsafe. I'm sorry you broke 3 ribs, Dad. I really am, and I'm sorry that I didn't.
It was humbling. It was humbling.
Yeah, my dad's sister-in-law came out and said, "Oh, Kay's in the water."
Right, and I have the lockmaster yelling down, "No swimming, no swimming," as if I was down there for my health. But
yeah,
it was humbling. I was so glad that I had put I'd taken her out of gear. She was in neutral, but again,
you should do anyway. Like, I mean, if you'd left it in gear, that's like a double whammy of things. Literally everything you're not supposed to do. Dad, if you could have woken me up. I know that I don't know. That was very silly.
Anyway, so the instances like that, which are humbling, that I can tell on myself, were actually very useful, really from day one out on the river, because those who've been over the side, none of them planned. I've never met anybody who intended to do that, and it is an existential event, wondering how it's going to turn out. So I've had some wonderfully frank discussions with mariners down in Columbus, Kentucky, and in Paducah, and various other places. And of course, you and I, Tim, we know the downside of that often, too often, Going into the river means, very tragic circumstances. I still, it sometimes haunts me how many times people go into the river and they're never seen again, and their remains are their bodies never found. That has to be very, very hard. I've done a number of funerals like that, and I won't say that they get any easier, because they don't.
Well, let's jump ahead a little bit. So I think you said you joined Seaman's Church in 2010.
That's right. June 1st of 2010, and I really kind of had to hit the ground running. There were within the first month, I was responding to crisis calls, man overboard, fatalities, and astoundingly, one vessel, the Sylvia H, lost 2 out of a crew of 9. 1 week they lost a new hire, deckhand. His first name was Zach, and what was it? A week later, the lead man, I guess the lead man or mate, who was due to retire at the end of that hitch, he passed of natural causes on board. So if you can imagine losing 2 out of 9 on the same hitch from the same crew, I mean, that was a crew that had been through an emotional ringer, and I don't know that it makes it for people ashore. Yes, it's a job, but it's more than that. I mean, when you spend in some cases more than half of your life you're away from home, you're living with people that you wouldn't have chosen, but you share a living space, you share dangers, you share work schedules, food. You may not have a lot of values in common necessarily, musical tastes, whatever, but you're there. And the one thing that I know of, and I've talked to people about this, is how much they miss having a shipmate who has their back, who is there for them, who would walk into a burning compartment to retrieve them. And I've met, I've been in the aftermath when people had, it's still breathtaking when I hear some of the stories. I don't want to bore you with the stories. It's there so many. I remember, and I don't want to pick on any one company, but there was a vessel where and there's a reason we say that the most dangerous day on the water is crew change day, or the day before, and in other words, in an effort to get everything done, sometimes there are shortcuts that are taken, and that was the case in this instance. And a chief engineer managed to, while he was souging and cleaning in his absolutely immaculate in the steering room, the pistons flattened him against the bulkhead, and he broke his pelvis in, I think, 12 places. I mean, he was. This would have been I mean, and of course nobody could hear him. This would have been a fatal injury, and for some reason there was a deckhand on board who was a former Marine, and he had returned from duty in Iraq, and he had a thing called CLS, combat life saving, and even though he was, again, just a kid by some standards, 23, 24. He had the presence of mind to not only the chief, who was in his late 30s, dragged himself to and was able to reach an alarm. And as I say, this young former Marine or a Marine veteran found him and calmly and coolly responded and saved the chief's life. And just amazing. Didn't want any credit for it, but I just thought this is amazing. This is a drama. This is more compelling than anything you could read, and it's real and it's true. And I was with the chief in the hospital. I guess it was Peoria, Illinois, and because it was sort of tied up in investigations and various other things that happen in these instances, no recognition ever came to the young man. But I remember thinking at the time it was too bad, because I really wanted to affirm and to validate this. They called him Joker, as in the Full Metal Jacket. And but and so 13 years later, I'm still thinking, I would love to have shaken his hand, but that wasn't my remit to do. But it certainly was memorable, and I just remember what a fantastic crew. And there are stories like that, so many of them that I personally witnessed and was involved with, that I would love for the American public to know and appreciate. That, because we taking nothing away from the Greatest Generation. I mean, what they did was remarkable. But my dad, we used to come out here to Paducah, and we'd have some wonderful times, and he would sign photos, because of course, he was treated like a rock star, and in many ways he was. But he would say to them, because he'd take the tour, he loved that stuff, and he would say, you're every bit as good. I think you're even better than we were, and no one knows it. And so he would sign his photograph of his ship in the high seas, to the latest Greatest Generation. And I know I've been aboard vessels where they had that framed, and it's still up years later. And that was not an overstatement. That's there are just some amazing people out there.
Sorry, what you're saying there. I mean, yes, that's beautiful and all that, and speaks to a larger thing of you talk about generational differences, and so he was Greatest Generation. You're more of the Boomer generation. And it is so. One thing I just sort of discovered when I moved back to Baltimore, was my one of my history advisor, who had been teaching at Johns Hopkins since 1974. When I reconnected with him, and I told him I was sailing on the Great Lakes. He said, "Oh, I used to sail. I sailed briefly as a deckhand on the Great Lakes. My math teacher in high school also did a stint in the Merchant Marine on the Great Lakes. And my brother, my dad's my uncle, my dad's brother, also sailed on the Great Lakes. I will say, and historically, whether it be Merchant Marine, whether it be just transportation jobs or industrial jobs, even larger, there's a certain amount of that sort of thing being in many ways a rite of passage, that I say, as a millennial generation, as a member of the millennial generation, I have some concerns that ooh, it's dirty, or ooh, it's that. And that's not to say, somewhere between
that silly the phrase that I was told once, "Steal ships, steal men," until, as Dad has painted this sordid picture of all the casualties and breakdowns and the emotional toll that, yes, there's that, and it's you, you don't need to be steal ships, steal men about it. You can have fun. We have steak days
every Sunday and stuff. Like there is the camaraderie there is real, but yeah, that sort of rite of that sort of the connection. I know that we know that many people that what was it, 0.1% of the U.S. population serves in the military. I don't remember what the statistic, but it's very, very low. And I'm sure that statistically it's similarly low in terms of maritime transportation. And but of people who actually do the driving or the engineering and all of that. Involvement in logistics. Oh, I have a degree in logistics. Okay, so you're a severe nerd, and you think you're like, part of me, like I think about this, having two bachelor's degrees. There are friends and former classmates and dare I say even family members where it's like, it's not about making a career necessarily out of it, but just sort of getting even a taste of it, to make one's emotional reaction more one of empathy than sympathy. Like, oh, that I can relate. Dad's never sailed on barges. He in fairness, that but that said, you've sailed yourself, so you can empathize. That's the difference. You've not, you've worked on the Western Rivers in the capacity as a chaplain. However, having been a Coast Guard enlisted and even an officer of the deck briefly, in the 80s, you can appreciate these sort of things. I guess I've sort of the short time that I've been sailing, I can only hope that mariners who the people in the maritime transportation industry feel that sort of connection with I by the way, I knew my grandfather as Moby because his name's Dixon Baldridge, so Moby Dick. So like but Dad, you talking about Moby that way, it just reminds me, with that sort of maritime heritage and the connection, the intergenerational connection. There's a lot of value in that, and I can only hope that it continues. Moving forward, and that's just that's all. That's just my take.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any details you can share of incidents of loss or casualty in your career?
Yes. I mean, there's one that was I probably can't, so but in terms of a casualty, that yes, occurred. That what happened, that did happen on the job, and yeah, it takes a lot out. There's no way to take a lot out of you, and the investigations and the conversations you have with shipmates after the fact is it's a lot. You don't wish that on anyone, and it really reminds you of that the job is very real, and that, well, I mean, safety stuff is there for a reason, including your own, because you never know when technically you might be responsible for your own. That your own choices might be technically responsible. No one, and no investigation is ever going to blame the deceased. But anyway, sorry, that's very vague, so maybe I'll just leave that at that. But there was a time on the Badger that a passenger. So we had we would carry tractors. Sometimes there would be tractor meets on one side of the lake or the other, and we would they would drive their own because tractors are very, specialized stuff. So we would let them down onto the car deck as we would approach the dock. And so when I would hand over the controls to the captain, I would go on down. I would go to the passenger area and say, okay, who's here from the tractor group? Okay, follow me down these steps. And it's a long row of steps. And when some of the passengers are in their 80s, I guess it can be a lot. And one of the passengers had a heart attack, and we immediately started doing CPR, and then someone fetched an AED, but the passenger passed, and that was really. That's the one and only time I've administered CPR, and I hope to never have to do that again. So I guess that's not really a marine casualty so much as it is the age and bad luck. But yeah, I don't know nothing in this life is guaranteed. Be good to each other. I don't have a sort of hippie conclusion to draw from that. And in terms of other casualties of my own, I guess there was an instance of I am fortunate to work alongside great folks. So there was one time when I was standing in for an AB, and I was securing the turnbuckles that we used to secure the fenders, and it was very, very hot. And I was filling in for an AB, and I got gassed pretty quickly because I wasn't really used to doing those turnbuckles, and one of the other mates who was with me was watching me, and he was like, "Yeah, Kempton, I think I'll let Ivan fill in for you, but go inside, cool off, and stuff." And that's I guess the better word for that would be honestly near miss, and while near misses are exactly as they sound, it speaks highly to what the company culture is in terms of overseeing everything and preemptively nipping what could have been worse. So that's something that it sucked at the time, but it sucked at the time. Of course, I was embarrassed afterwards. I was like, I got gas really quickly, and and I'll tell you, there's no way around the fact between the hot air and doing turnbuckles between two rubber Yokohama fenders. You want to talk about some really trapped air? Not to be crude, even on a good day, if you fart in between those fenders, you're outside and it still is trapped, which is pretty astounding that you could be outside and still, Dutch oven yourself. So anyway, that's my lighthearted, crude way of ending that. That's that.
They missed that in the training manual.
Yeah, they should. That's honestly, I'll have to reach out to our vessel operator and say, include in the training manual, like, don't fart in between fenders because it will haunt you. Yeah.
And back to you, Chaps. Okay, so Seamen's Church in 2010. How soon did you meet Turbo?
Actually, fairly soon. I began riding the harbor vessels. The Stephen P. Venable and the Eva Walker, et cetera, and the process of making tow with the Hornet. So I would say probably around 2011, and I as I say, I do remember meeting him, and we have that expression, standing on the shoulders of giants. I followed a wonderful, wonderful natural chaplain by the name of Jim Wilkinson, who was the first on the Western rivers, and he had made it easy for me to. I didn't have to explain to people why I was there or what a chaplain was. He'd been doing it since, I guess, 96, something like that, 97. And so it made it easy for me. And there were certain companies that, like Ingram, that where we had not carte blanche. We could. I always asked permission, but the permission was always granted. And John O'Purley, who was the vessel operations maven at the time, used to say, anytime, chaps. But I would always, ask his permission. And there were certain, when I began to feel a little bit more comfortable, because on the one hand, you want to be present so that that people know you're there. On the other hand, you want to be that fly on the wall. You don't want to be you don't want to interfere with anything or present a hazard to yourself. And so I think achieving that balance came. I began to get a sense of that on the harbor tugs. And so when Turbo and the Martha Denton and some other vessels where they would invite me to, how long could you stay? and which is what you want to hear as opposed to you still here. And on the Hornet, the learning about the history of the Hornet, how it had been acquired, and even gotten its name. And I loved that history, and so I leaned into that. And next time I came back, I had done some research, and Ingram spends all kinds of wonderful money on the safety equipment and the habitability, but interior decorating, not so much. And so I came back with a box of books and various other things that I thought would be appreciated, and a separate box with 8x10 frames of vessels that other vessels that went by the name Hornet. Fascinating that, for example, Mark Twain wrote about that. There was a clipper ship named the Hornet that burned to the waterline, and Mark Twain wrote about it. It was one of the first books he ever had published. Turbo loved that. and of course we know about the World War II aircraft carrier that launched the Doolittle Raiders, and on and on. But there was the HMS Hornet, and so I came, and I think I had about 10 frames of photographs, which Turbo then Turbo and let me see the other and his relief, they went through and they picked the best ones for their own cabin and then spread the other pictures around. And I think I might have even sent out to Alameda, where the USS Hornet is retired as a museum ship. I think I might have gotten a deal on some ball caps, and that. So yeah, Turbo will be the first to admit that he can be bribed or influenced. So I was welcome to return anytime, and rode with them a lot. In fact, there are certain Ingram vessels that will always have a very special place in my heart. The Turbo is now the Brian Rafferty, I think, isn't it? I think that's right. But they've since renamed the Hornet from the Turbo. The Hornet has since been renamed, and I shared with I guess Les Grimm had moved on by that point, but I mentioned it to Aaron Barrett and some of the other folks there on the shore side. You know, this is more than just a workplace here. You know, there's a certain grieving process. You know, they're used to it, because they asked me to actually do the renaming or the rechristening. I said they're grown-ups, they can handle it, but you know, just give them a moment. And yeah, there what 3,500 towboats in the 8th district that we know, that the Coast Guard knows about, I think, and some of them look very similar to one another. You know, they same manufacturer, you know, whether it's, you know, Dravo or whatever, but each one has their own character, and they're more than just inanimate objects. When they're crewed up, and when they're running the way whichever crew likes having it run, it has something extra, you know, or something. It's meaningful, and if you doubt that, go aboard a vessel where it's cold iron and no one's on board, and you know, maybe they're tearing it up to do a rehab, or maybe they're getting ready to scrap it, and there's a huge difference. It really is. And yeah, you know, you can say it's silly or that's putting too much into it, but I reminded what Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain once said when he was going up at Little Round Top. You know, it was just a hill with lots of rocks, but he said, you know, in all great deeds, something abides, something lives on, and making reference to in the biblical reference that, you know, if these stones could talk, and I think the same could be said of the vessels that go up and down the rivers, and on the coasts, and you know, overseas. You know, I think about the Richard A. Baker. You know, June 12th, 2012. It was just a day at work for them, and they weren't planning on it, but they undertook. They were right there at St. Louis Harbor. They're northbound, I think, with I want to say 12 loads, and they saved a family of 5 who were headed for certain death. And the Coast Guard later described it as the most daring river rescue in modern history. And it cost Kyle Hardman, who was the Vietnam vet and who'd been in the first year of or the first season of Deadliest Catch, and he came ashore because his mother was worried about his safety out there. And of course, in the process of effecting that rescue of that family of 5, including, you know, 2 small children, he died. And so, yeah, it's just a big steel boat doing a job, but there's something more, and not everybody feels it. You know, Kempton and I were talking about, you know, the family members who just don't understand what the appeal is, and that's fine. But this is an honorable profession, and I guess I wanted to the day I die, I really do want to lift up and affirm and validate the men and women who are out here. And maybe to take their cause, if you will, to let people know just how much we rely on their efforts, but also I want them to have an appreciation for what they do.
Yeah, Dad. So you bring up a pretty good point that, yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to maritime transportation, you know, everyone remembers, you know, Evergreen and Ever Given, and, you know, everyone on social media is, you know, whether it be the Suez Canal or Chesapeake Bay, oh shit, what's going down? Okay, you know, that sucks that people only care when there's something dramatic going on, and you know, I
part of me wishes, where's the Twilight Zone episode of what if maritime transportation was shut down? Because, there's that you can talk about, we can talk about, anyone who knows it knows about the vitality of it at a global level. And there's a whole other, conversation to be had about the national about the national maritime
Mhm.
fleet and Jones Act and all that stuff. But I will say that you're talking about names and the sort of you're talking about vessel names and the nature of it being their home and whatnot. And we've had this conversation a lot because you've done a lot of boat christenings for these names that who cares? Who knows who these people are? Because if when you're in a Navy veteran who served on the USS Hornet, the USS Lost, even the USS Bella Wood, named after historic vessels or historic battles, or for that matter, and in fairness, the U.S. Navy right now really does not do a good job of naming their vessels consistently. There was a time when you could, if you heard what the name of a vessel was, you would know what kind of vessel it was. It's no longer like that because that's not how congressional budgets work, which, great.
Right, yeah. Well, as someone said, fish don't vote. So,
Yeah, Hyman Rickover said that.
Right, yeah.
And you take things that Hyman Rickover said with a certain grain of salt. I mean, but he's not wrong anyway. But I do think about, especially with in the case of the inland rivers, why with all the different U.S. cities and towns that dot the Ohio, the Cumberland, the Tennessee, the Mississippi, the Missouri, why there isn't a greater way of or a better, in terms of naming them after some of these cities and towns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because then you can have something where those same cities and towns can have a connection to an actively sailing vessel. The four vessels that form the AEC offshore fleet are the excellence, the innovator, the responsibility, and the partnership. And the driving force behind that was those are the company values. You know what? That's fair. That's a fair thing. Those are all, the Navy Minecraft, where the Avenger, the Devastator, that works too. These are all things that you can rally behind. The value, whether it be values or Avenger and Devastator are just cool sounding names. You can come up with some fun artwork. I did it, and I won't even necessarily even poo-poo naming it after a person. I did my last Cadet C project on the USNS Red Cloud, which was named for a Korean War veteran. I guess maybe my one thing that I just find to be really like, how insecure do you have to be a living, breathing human being? And let's name that boat after me. Sir, did you, charge a Korean hill, many years ago? Like, are you a Medal of Honor winner, or do you just own the vessel? Because if you just own the vessel, owning it should be enough. You're not even actively sailing. Like, what's enough? I wonder, for ship owners and people on the shore side and beyond side of things. What that's my half soapbox thing. But or maritime heroes within the Western rivers and stuff, or the Gulf and stuff. There's such a deep well of concepts and towns and cities and wildlife and people who you've named, heroic people for vessels to be named after. So to name it after a bean counter, it's kind of a really prestigious bean counter. It's like, sure. But anyway, there's my soapbox. I'm done. My bad.
I won't necessarily comment on those points directly, but in the industry, in the barge industry, it has been painted certainly as the greatest honor that could ever be bestowed upon a person to have a towing vessel named after them. I've not witnessed any that were family, but it's been employees, whether it's on the water shore side, anywhere. You say bean counter, I laughed a little bit inside, but anyway.
Well, I was lamenting the fact, I don't know if you can hear me, Tim, but this person right here, that happens to be Valentine B. Horton. That name doesn't mean anything to you. That's okay, because we've forgotten who he was. The inventor of the towboat. And the first towboat was the Condor, and it was a purpose-built vessel. He came up with the idea of standardized size barges and having one vessel, or one powered vessel return the empty barges back upriver, and that was in 1836, and I don't know why no one thought of it before Valentine B. Horton of New England, from Vermont, but he did, and he made enough money by 1842 to build a church. He built Grace Episcopal Church at mile 250. I know these things, and I love these things, but it sometimes saddens me that I may be the only person outside of Pomeroy, Ohio, who knows who that is. I think I do think we need to do a better job of lifting up our heritage, and in a good way. I mean, he was a good man. He was even a congressman, and
I just wanted to say I'm glad to hear that on the Western Rivers that crew members have vessels named for them. My first cadet sea project was done on the motor vessel Roger Blau, who was the owner of U.S. Steel and went to war with JFK in the early '60s. It's like, that's my point of reference, admittedly, on the lakes. But the maritime heritage kind of thing, that warms the cockles of my heart, honestly, that crew members for the many types of boats. And I know from Dad that the Western Rivers is where the new vessels are being built, and that's the other. I mean, there's something to be said for that whole. There may be hope yet for the U.S. flag fleet, because people talk about the shrinkage. Yeah, only so far as the deep sea.
Well, I mean, Tim, Kempton and I were just talking about this before the interview. I find it very sad that in Jeffersonville, the Jeff boat closed in 2018 after 175 years, and that there was no real impetus to save the industry, but not just the infrastructure, but the brain trust, the thousands of years worth of accumulated knowledge and skill that these wonderful artisans, really. I mean, they were shipyard workers, but they were craftsmen, and they cared deeply. And having, on behalf of Seamen's Church, I went to Jeffersonville, and we had a pancake breakfast for them, and not necessarily as a morale builder, but just to let them know that we were thinking of them. And that it does sadden me to think that we, as a country, don't recognize the great value that our shipbuilding industry has brought.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of history in this industry that I do not know, that I've been working to uncover with this podcast. But that leads me to possibly a closing topic or closing point. How recently have you retired?
My first day of retirement was March 1st, 2022.
So you put up with turbo for 11 years. Well, congratulations on that. And in your retirement, I think you mentioned during COVID, possibly you started a new project.
Yeah. Actually, I've been. This was my therapy. It's called This Day in Maritime History, And if there was a point I was trying to make, it's that every day is a day in maritime history if you know where to look. And it began with an awareness of sinkings and things like that. But having being intentional about it, I was able to suss out some just some marvelous history that my long-suffering wife Isabel, she was the fact that she would put up with me, running into whatever she was doing, look what I've discovered. Did you know? And I would come up with, for example, that the very first one of the first two steamboat pilots to make the passage on the Sangamon River was a fellow by the name of Abraham Lincoln. In fact, it was one of his first paid jobs. He was paid $40 for that. And did you know that Abraham Lincoln was the only president to receive a patent? A patent for what? He was awarded a patent for a device that would help to float steamboats that had run aground. I mean, stuff like this, when you uncover that, and to realize that whether we know it or we may be unaware, but that doesn't make us any less dependent upon what is happening in the maritime world, and the fact that it's out of sight. I mean, for those of us with issues around object permanence, if you don't see it, you don't think about it. Well, I think that's true largely of our society, and so I had some fun with this. Every day, in fact, almost every day, I was able to find one or two, sometimes more, 3 or 4 different events, and not just disasters, but inventions or the birth of a significant person, or just, for example, writers who found their voice at sea or on board ship. Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible Man. Langston Hughes. Langston Hughes was a college dropout who shipped out, and in fact, he threw his books from Columbia University into the wake of the ship. And it was through going to sea, and seeing a bit of the world that he discovered what he was about. And actors, Cliff Robertson, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, he was a recent high school graduate, and as in, I mean, he was 18 years old from a fairly well-to-do family in California. And this 4-engine Japanese Mavis bomber is bombing and strafing him. He was there in the Philippines, and he probably wisely said to himself, "Get me the heck out of here." But by the end of the war, he had done a little bit more school, but he decided to become a merchant marine officer. And again, these are stories that are worth telling and worth knowing. We're celebrating. So yeah, I had some fun with that. I hope when the Postal Service delivers you your copy, so that you'll have some light reading, maybe.
I look forward to receiving that. Is it for sale anywhere?
Well, yeah, my wife is yelling from the other room. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, not yet. We've been working on trying to package it in such a way, because it's been self-published, and if people want additional copies, yes, I'm accepting funds for that. It does have an ISBN number, which I'm so proud that I figured out how to do that. And there's the ISBN number right there. But we're working on it. The 2024 edition, which is obviously going to have some new dates, in some ways makes my point for me. that I don't know how many dates, or I don't think there's anything that really needs to drop out. But every day I'm learning about new events or new occurrences or new people that need to go in there. And so I think a 2024 edition with a better cover and with better pagination, and my wife says larger print, is probably on the way. The first 60 copies were given to the upperclassmen at the New York Maritime Academy when I was there last summer, as a Salloway, as a tribute to their efforts and their service, but also their part in maritime history. They're making it now, whether they know it or not.
It's great to hear. I look forward to getting that copy in my hands. One final question, and I'll offer the floor back to Kempton to start. But same question for both of you. Kempton, speak as long and thoroughly as you care to, or as you're able. And then of course, Chaps, chime in and add any color, any additional insights. But for both of you, what has this industry meant for this country over the last 200 years? What does it look like today, and what do you see for it tomorrow?
Okay, that's a fantastic question. That's a solid essay prompt. You can do a master's thesis, a doctoral thesis. What is maritime history? Okay, three quarters of this world is covered in water. So it just is. There's a certain practical nature to it. This country is is the conductor, more whether we like it or not, of the Western Hemisphere. So from being this sort of unique, we are over there from everyone else, and it's through shipping that we are connected to the rest of the world. So that's just that's just reality. And we might like to think of ourselves as snug and isolated away. There's a certain safety net in North and South America, but you can't ignore. You can't self-isolate, especially there's a certain reality that globalization post 1945, that it's here to stay, and free trade in some way, shape, or form is going to exist, and that's not to sort of openly question cabotage laws and things like the Jones Act and stuff, but there's a value system that we spent the first 20 years from 45 to 65, or even the full fit, leading up to the fall of the Soviet Union, that we were like, this is how it's going to be. We're going to see it through, and we've. It's been tested at various points, but that seems to be the way that things are moving. So, I have a book that my grandfather gave to my dad, and then my dad gave it to me, of Ships of the Merchant Marine. So, and it was written in 1946 at the high point, when the U.S. merchant shipping was at its highest. And with a forward from Chester Nimitz talking about the invaluable nature of the U.S. merchant marine during World War II. We're not there anymore, sadly. There's the whole parallel conversation between public and private investment, and the sort of byproduct of more open borders and shipbuilding being cheaper overseas, and
Labor.
you know, and labor as well. So there are trials that have been it's been tested, and we've seen, you know, quite a great deal of shrinkage of the U.S. Merchant Marine, but you know, and you know, fingers crossed we never have to fight anything like what we won in 1945. But I remember when I was a kid, just sort of doing amateur stuff, playing World War II games that were obviously a lot simpler. And I was like, well, look how many ships that sank and this and such. And I remember my dad, in a very stoic manner, saying, amateurs study tactics, but, you know, winners study logistics. And then he would just walk away while I'm playing some Windows 95 DOS game. I'm like, okay, this game is not that complex. I'm not. It's called Great Naval Battles 3. It's merely tactics. And I mean, have you seen how bad the graphics are? Like, anyway, there's a lot of truth to that, though, in terms of you know, the tactic, you know, the Merchant Marine and ensuring a robust Merchant Marine from from inland to near coastal to ocean going. It's all, you know, with the exception of water density, liquids are liquids. So the principles remain the same, the skills remain the same. And, you know, we don't get to, you know, we're not going to decide if something, if God forbid, knock on wood, that a World War III occurs, that you know, we can't, we'll do our best to sort of not to see a tentative world peace, but that you know, hold through. But if not, it sure is nice to ensure that shipping lanes remain open, that stuff gets from A to B across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, you know, that goods and services are able to be moved from A to B to C to D to, you know, Z and to A prime. And that's what my grandfather did, and that's not going to change in a worst case scenario event. So where we are now is certainly not where we want to be, and having contingencies does not necessarily mean we're gonna, you know, having fire extinguishers in life perhaps doesn't mean that you hope to never use them, but you still have them and you still maintain all that safety equipment. So there's whether it be safety on a vessel, you know, life-saving apparatuses and safety apparatuses on a vessel, you know, for the state at a national level, you know, it's just security measures. So there's reason to, just because it's cheaper overseas doesn't mean it's right. And you know, I know that's, you know, going down the moralizing path isn't really that's not going to do anything. I commented on this a couple months ago, saying, you know, in a pinch, I guess the fact that the Marshall Islands registered vessels are the third largest in the world, maybe maybe there's our backup plan. Maybe that's what a future maritime strategy looks like. I don't know. So everything I just was talking about is from a national security perspective. But moreover, you know, I wrote about, as an undergrad, I wrote about maritime history, and now I'm doing it. So not everything in life, you know, you don't need to be a serial killer to be interested to speak about, you know, murder. I'm not. Here's what I'm getting at. Sorry, that was a weird. Let me back up a minute.
Consciousness.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is that in order you don't always have to do the thing in order to write about the thing. But in the case of maritime affairs, it helps a great deal. You doing the thing even for, and that's what I was getting at earlier with my senior, my history, my thesis advisor. He wrote, he'd been teaching at Johns Hopkins since 1974, but for a hot second, he sailed. My math teacher in high school, primarily, well, actually, he did in fact he flew E2s for the Navy, but just a perfect example. He was a deckhand on the Great Lakes, and then he flew E2s, and then he ended up being a high school teacher. My uncle was an environmentalist, but before that, he sailed for a bit. Joseph Conrad, we know, is a prolific writer and commentator on colonial era, what have you, on colonial era politics and culture. But he also was a merchant mariner, and
A
there's a reason
master
why his
mariner.
writing is so authentic. So I get so boy that was all over the place, and I even sorry about the serial killer remark. That was just a half baked
Well,
thought.
no,
But
maybe I can.
yeah, you take it.
Yeah, I'm going to say that the young George Washington, who made his way to what would someday become Pittsburgh. He was, I think, 25 when he first set eyes on the Ohio River, and he had an epiphany. He realized this right here. This is the guarantor of the future vitality of our country. We have this magnificent conveyor belt taking that goes all the way down to New Orleans. He hadn't seen it yet, but he recognized immediately. And he knew what I think sometimes the subsequent political leaders, elected leaders have forgotten. And it boils down to the Newton's second law, that if you can eliminate friction, you can move the world, basically. And as Tim, as I'm sure you know, that there have been times when with the introduction of the railroads, people were convinced, oh, well, the river industry, that's passe. That's and then same thing with trucks and automobiles and airplanes. There is no substitute. The one place where we have excess capacity, and the one place where that makes shipping of any bulk cargoes cost effective is water, the inland waterways, and so the idea, and the best example of this is an awkward little seagoing vessel that's based in Decatur, Alabama, by the name of the Rocket Ship. It used to be called the Delta Mariner. And it is an absolute fact that to get to Mars, you have to go on the river. And I mean, they're in Huntsville. Those rockets, those rockets and rocket boosters, they're loaded onto as they say, an ungainly little vessel with a crew of 28, and just wonderful guys who are amazingly skilled. And it starts out from there, goes up the goes up the Tennessee River, across Kentucky Lake, and down the Mississippi on its way to either Cape Canaveral or Vandenberg. And that's how we're going to get to Mars. But it starts out on the river. What more do you need to know?
Well, gentlemen, I thank you both very much. I think that's as good a place as any to stop. Do either of you have anything else to share?
Just want to thank you very much for the opportunity. We don't often get a chance to flap our gums about something that we both feel passion to. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Tim.
I appreciate the time, gentlemen. Talk to y'all soon.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.